Emmanuel Macron says he will be a president for all of France as he prepares to begin another 5 years in office. His victory over Marine Le Pen was larger than expected, but more than 4 in 10 voters cast their ballot for the far right, their best ever result. Shona Murray reports now.
It's with the background music of Ode to Joy, the anthem of the European Union, that French President Emmanuel Macron marked his re-election. For the European Union, Macron's success against the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen is indeed a relief. His success rules out the prospect of great paralysis within the EU, particularly at such a crucial time during the war in Ukraine. However, it's this war and its far-reaching consequences which will dictate the political and policy agenda of the French presidency.
The priority is the urgency of the war in Ukraine and its economic consequences. The question of European defense, how to curb inflation, how to get out of oil and Russian gas, the question of sanctions also on Russia. And then there are certain projects to be carried out, in particular the question of the carbon mechanism at the borders for the climate transition.
But this decisive victory of Emmanuel Macron can't mask the distrust expressed by voters in Marine Le Pen towards the EU. With 41% of the vote, this showing for the extreme right marks the new fracture in the political world.
The great debate in France, after having been a right-left debate, is an opening-closing, optimist-pessimist, beneficiary of globalization or victim of globalization debate.
After France, authoritarian populists suffered other setbacks in Europe. The Slovenian Prime Minister Janez Janša lost the legislative elections to the Liberal candidate. This defeat further isolates Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has long pursued an illiberal programme against the EU.
The Slovenian result was actually just as interesting and important potentially as the French result, because here we had a Viktor Orban-like figure in Prime Minister Janez Janša, defeated very comprehensively and somewhat unexpectedly, I would say. And it is at least the third big defeat for populist right-wing leaders in Europe over the last 6 months, including that of Boyko Borisov in Bulgaria and Mr. Babiš in the Czechia.
But the EU still has a problem on its hands if it wants to push back Eurosceptic populism and remind citizens of the long-term benefits of European unity. Shona Murray, Euronews, Brussels.
Well, on the day after the night before, we can go over to our international correspondent, Annelise Borges, who joins me from Paris. Annelise, this might be a second term for Macron, but at the same time, this is also the highest turnout for far-right voters. So how much of a challenge will he have now?
No, this is definitely going to pose a challenge for Emmanuel Macron over the next 5 years. First, because he will have to reunite a deeply fractured France. 13 million people voted for Marine Le Pen in the second round of these presidential elections. And that means something. That means, for example, that improving purchasing power, which was one of Marine Le Pen's main promises, will have to be an area of focus for Emmanuel Macron. He promised a new project for France, a project that is not a continuity of the last 5 years, but something new, something better, something that doesn't leave anyone behind. And we all know what happens when that is the case. We all remember the crisis called the Yellow Vests movement, something that really troubled the beginning of Emmanuel Macron's government. He will certainly try to avoid that kind of reaction at all costs. Helena?
And I think, Annelise, it's fair to say that one of the first challenges he will face, of course, is those parliamentary elections in June. What do you make of that? Is this the moment that the far left fights back?
Well, the leader of the far left has actually already started campaigning even before the night of the second round, even before the vote yesterday. Jean-Luc Mélenchon called on his voters to elect him as prime minister. He was talking about a third round of the election, citing the legislative vote in June, saying that it's through that they will make their voices heard. It's through that they will resist. Jean-Luc Mélenchon was by considered by many here the real winner of this year's race. He gathered over almost 8 million votes in the first round. That is also a record for his movement. And Emmanuel Macron will have to try and find space for those demands as well going forward. We've seen how hard it's been for Emmanuel Macron to govern over the last 5 years. He did manage to apply some of his vision for France, but there was quite a lot of resistance, and also, of course, the global pandemic of COVID-19. But those difficulties that he has faced, he faced despite having control of both houses of Congress. Can you imagine if the situation changes in June? So Emmanuel Macron is said to have already started to mobilize a real army of supporters to continue this race, to continue fighting, and of course with their aim is the elections in June.
That's the thing, Annelies. As you say, can you imagine? Can you imagine if he doesn't have that strong mandate? We all remember the yellow vest protests, for example, and he's still got those kind of issues in his in-tray. He's still got things like the pension reform and other kind of contentious issues. So how difficult would it be to then get on with the job when it comes to these kinds of reforms?
Well, Emmanuel Macron's team and his ministers and close allies and aides were speaking to the press last night, saying that he already has a clear mandate, that he won a resounding victory, that it was not the kind of success that we saw 5 years ago when he won 66% of the vote. Last night he got 58% of the vote, but it was a solid victory indeed, in that they hope they will be able to pass through some of those ambitious reforms that Emmanuel Macron has been talking about since 2017, notably the reform of the pension system. But of course, this is going to be a challenge. Emmanuel Macron is a leader known to enjoy these formidable challenges. Will he be able to actually deliver a new France, a France, like he said yesterday, a green France? We'll have to wait and see. But of course, there will be resistance. Will it come in the shape of members of parliament that don't agree with his vision? Will it come in the streets? Well, that is what we're going to have to wait and see. And that's what Emmanuel Macron is going to have to pay to see as well.